The Forest Service map shows our tower at coordinates 44.7821 N, 121.3344 W. I have stood at the base of the tower and read those numbers off my GPS. They were correct. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same spot, on the same concrete pad, and read 44.8106 N, 121.2987 W. The tower had not moved. I had not moved. The map had not been redrawn. I should explain how this started, because if you work for the agency that hired me, or one like it, there's a reasonable chance you'll see the orientation packet I'm describing, and you'll need to know what the gaps in it mean. My name doesn't matter for this. What matters is that I was hired in late April under a seasonal classification the Forest Service uses for fire lookouts in regions where the towers are too remote, too old, or too irregular to staff through the standard fire prevention bid process. The contract called it Class 4 observation. I had done 2 seasons of Class 2 at a tower in northern Idaho, which is a normal lookout job. You sit in a glass cab on a mountain, you watch for smoke, you take weather readings 4 times a day, you radio in your azimuths when you see a column. Boring, mostly. Beautiful. Class 4 is different. The pay is roughly 3 times higher. The interview is in person. They asked me about my sleep patterns, whether I had children, whether anyone would come looking for me if I went a week without contact. They asked whether I had ever experienced what they called geographic disorientation in familiar terrain. I said no. They wrote it down anyway. The orientation packet was 46 pages. Most of it was standard, radio protocols, weather instrumentation, fuel moisture sampling, the usual lookout curriculum. But there was a 6-page section near the back titled Operational Variances for Mobile Reference Stations. That was the part that mattered. I'll get to the variances. First I need to describe the place. The tower I was assigned to is in the Ochoco National Forest, in central Oregon, in a section of timber the agency files internally as the Mendel allotment. It does not appear on the Public Forest Service map. It appears on the topographic survey, but only as an unnamed parcel between 2 named drainages. The road in is gated twice. The first gate is standard Forest Service. The second gate is a private-looking cattle gate with no signage, and the combination changes every 14 days. I was given the rotation schedule on a laminated card and told to memorize it. The card itself was to remain in the tower. The tower is steel, 4-legged, 82 feet tall, with a 14 by 14 cab at the top. Built in 1953 according to the plaque inside. Rehabilitated in 1987, 2004, and 2019. The cab has a working stove, a cot, an Osborne firefinder mounted on a central pedestal, and 3 radios. 2 are standard VHF. The third is a single-channel UHF with no labeling on the faceplate, which I was told to monitor at all times but never to transmit on unless specifically instructed. The view from the cab is excellent. You can see roughly 30 miles in every direction on a clear day. Mostly ponderosa, some lodgepole, scattered meadows, the curve of the John Day drainage to the north. Beautiful country. The first 3 days were normal. I want to be precise about that, because the wrongness was not immediate. I worked through my checklists. I called in my morning weather at 0800. I took my fuel moisture samples at the 4 ground stations within walking distance of the tower. I logged azimuths on 2 distant smokes, both of which turned out to be permitted/burns. I ate dinner. I slept. The radio chatter was exactly what it should be, the usual cross-traffic from the Prineville Dispatch Center, the other lookouts in the region calling in their checks, the occasional engine crew working a project fire down south. On the morning of the fourth day, I stepped out of the tower to refill the rainwater catch, and the access road was on the wrong side of the tower. That is the cleanest way I can describe it. The road came in from the southeast. I had driven it in, I knew where it was, I had walked it twice. On the morning of the fourth day, the road came in from the northwest. The gate, which I could see from the catwalk on the second flight of stairs, was visible through a different gap in the trees than it had been the day before. I went back up. I checked my GPS. I checked the Osborne. I cited the two ridge lines I had been using as my orientation reference, Coyote Butte to the south, an unnamed knob to the east-northeast. They were where they should have been. The road was not. I sat in the cab for a long time. Then I opened the orientation packet to the operational variances section and read it again, slowly, the way you read a contract you've already signed. The first variance was titled Reference Drift. I'll quote the relevant paragraph because I memorized it. Operators at mobile reference stations may observe periodic discrepancies between fixed terrain features and the station's recorded position. These discrepancies are expected. Operators should not attempt to reconcile them through independent measurement. Report the discrepancy on Form MSRS 2 and resume normal operations. Do not relocate equipment. Do not attempt to physically verify the new position by traversing to a reference point on foot. There was a Form MSRS 2 in the desk drawer. I filled it out. The form asked for the original coordinates, the new coordinates, the date and time of the discrepancy, and a free text field for observed terrain inconsistencies. I wrote that the access road appeared to enter the parcel from a different cardinal direction. I radioed it in on the UHF channel, which I had not yet used. A woman's voice answered after about 40 seconds. She did not give a call sign. She said, MSRS 2 received, a Choco station. Continue normal operations. Acknowledge. I acknowledged. She added, before signing off, don't walk the road today. That was the fourth day. I want to talk about the rules before I go further, because they are the spine of what happened, and without them the rest of this won't make sense. The operational variances section listed 9 of them. They were not numbered like rules. They were written as procedural guidance, embedded in dense paragraphs, and a casual reader would have skimmed past most of them. But once you started living inside the document, you began to see them as instructions, and you began to understand that they had been written by someone who had needed them. The first I have already mentioned. Don't try to verify a position discrepancy by walking to it. The second concerned the road. On days when the access route shows variance from its surveyed alignment, foot traffic outside the immediate tower footprint is not authorized. The footprint is defined as the concrete pad and the area within 10 meters of the structural legs. The third concerned the radio. The UHF channel is monitored continuously by mobile reference operations. Operators are not to transmit on this channel except in response to direct query, in acknowledgement of an MSRS form transmission, or in the event of a Category 3 observation. I will get to Category 3. The fourth concerned what the document called secondary observers. Operators may, on rare occasions, observe individuals or vehicles within the parcel who are not on the access manifest. These observations should be logged on Form MSRS 4. Operators are not to make verbal contact, are not to descend the tower, and are not to acknowledge observation through gesture, light, or movement at the cab windows. The fifth concerned smoke. Smoke columns originating within the Mendel allotment proper are to be reported on the UHF channel only. Standard dispatch reporting on VHF is reserved for smoke originating outside the parcel boundary as recorded on the date of report. That phrase, as recorded on the date of report, took me a long time to parse. It meant the boundary itself was understood to be variable. The sixth concerned the weather. Operators may observe meteorological conditions at the station that do not correspond to regional forecast or to conditions visible at distance. Local readings are authoritative for the purposes of fuel moisture and fire behavior calculations within the parcel. Regional forecasts remain authoritative for the surrounding districts. The seventh concerned sleep. Operators experiencing auditory phenomena during nighttime hours, including but not limited to footsteps on the catwalk, voices on dormant radio channels, or knocking at the cab door, are to remain in the cab, secure the door, and continue rest. Do not respond. Do not investigate. The phenomena are not indicative of intrusion. The eighth concerned what they called horizon anomaly. On clear days, operators may observe terrain features at distance that do not appear on the topographic survey. These features may include ridgelines, watercourses, or apparent structures. They are not to be reported as new construction or as unauthorized activity. Photograph if convenient. Do not attempt to range or triangulate. The ninth was the shortest. If you observe yourself, do not approach. Descend the tower only when relieved by the scheduled relief operator. The relief operator will identify themselves by a coded phrase issued at the start of each rotation. My coded phrase, given to me at the trailhead by the men who walked me up to the tower on the first day, was, "I came up the long way." I want to be clear that I read all of this on day 4, sitting in the cab, after the road had moved. I had read it before, during orientation, but I had read it the way you read a safety briefing on an airplane, with one eye, expecting nothing. On day 4 I read it the other way. The rest of the first week was uneventful. The road returned to its original position by the morning of day 6. I filed a second MSRS, 2 noting the return. The same woman acknowledged on the UHF and said, "Welcome back to baseline, Achoko." I asked her, against the protocol, whether the parcel itself moved or whether my perception of it moved. There was a long pause. She said, "We don't have a vocabulary for that question that wouldn't mislead you. Continue normal operations." I want to describe the second week because the second week is where the structure of the thing began to become legible to me. On the morning of day 9 I was taking my 0800 weather when I noticed a column of smoke at azimuth 274 degrees, distance approximately 12 miles. I sighted it through the Osborne. It was a thin gray column, vertical, no flag, indicating low wind at the source. I checked my map. The azimuth and the distance put the source roughly on the western edge of the Mendel allotment, possibly inside it, possibly just outside. I stared at it for several minutes, trying to decide whether it was inside or outside the parcel boundary as recorded on the date of report. I called it in on UHF. The woman acknowledged. She asked me to characterize the column. I gave her the standard description. She asked whether I could see a base. I said no, the base was below a ridgeline. She asked me to hold position and continue observation. 20 minutes later, the column was gone. Not diminished. Gone. No residual haze, no thinning, no drift. The sky in that quadrant was clear. I called it in. She acknowledged. She said, "Log as resolved." No further action. I asked her what had resolved it. She said, "The same thing that started it. Don't worry about it." That afternoon, I saw a vehicle on the access road. It was a green pickup, late model, no agency markings. It came up the road slowly, stopped about 300 yards short of the tower, and sat for roughly 40 minutes with the engine off. I watched it through the spotting scope mounted on the south window. There was a man in the driver's seat. He was looking up at the tower. He was not moving. I filed Form immersive 4. I did not wave. I did not signal. I did not descend. After 40 minutes the truck reversed, turned around in a wide spot in the road, and drove out the way it came. I watched it until it passed the inner gate. The gate was closed when it arrived and closed when it left. The truck did not stop at the gate. I radioed it in. The woman said, acknowledged. He's not on the manifest. He's also not a problem. Continue normal operations. I asked if there was anything I should know. She said, he visits sometimes. He's allowed to look. He's not allowed to come up. He knows that. She paused. She said, if he ever stands at the base of the tower and looks up, you call me immediately. If he ever puts a hand on the ladder, you tell me before you do anything else. Understood. I understood. On day 11 I had my first auditory phenomenon. It was 0247 in the morning. I was asleep on the cot. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the catwalk outside. The catwalk is steel grating, it rings when you walk on it. The footsteps were unhurried, even, circling the cab from north to east to south. I lay still. I thought about the seventh variance. I did not get up. I did not turn on the lamp. I did not go to the door. The footsteps completed 3 full circuits and stopped. Then there was a knock at the cab door. 3 slow taps, evenly spaced. I did not respond. After about a minute there was another knock. 3 taps, slightly faster. I did not respond. There was a third sequence, faster still, and then nothing. I lay awake until dawn. When the light came up I went to the door and opened it. The catwalk was empty. The dust on the grating, there is always dust, fine pumice and pollen, was undisturbed in both directions. I want to say I was frightened. I was not, exactly. The protocol had told me what to expect, and the experience had matched the protocol, and there is a strange sedation in that. The agency had known. The agency had written it down. I had followed the procedure. The procedure had worked. That is, I think, the first stage of the thing. The procedure works. You begin to trust the procedure. You begin to feel like the procedure is a kind of friend. It is not a friend. It is a fence. And after a while you begin to wonder what's on the other side of it, and why someone went to the trouble of building it. By day 14 I had begun keeping a private log. I want to be clear that this was not authorized. The orientation packet had been explicit that all observations were to be recorded on the appropriate immersive forms and submitted on the UHF, and that no personal documentation was to leave the tower. I was not breaking that rule, exactly. I was keeping a notebook that I intended to destroy at the end of my rotation. But I had begun to want a record I could read. The log was simple. Date, time, observation, my interpretation. I had 11 entries by the end of the second week. Some of them were small. The thermometer outside the cab read 58 degrees one morning when the regional forecast called for a low of 28. The flag on the south corner of the cab was hanging slack while I could see, through the scope, the trees on Coyote Butte bending under heavy wind. A flock of geese passing south at altitude, normal, except they were silent. Geese in formation always call, and these did not. Some of them were larger. On day 15 I observed, through the scope, what appeared to be a second fire tower on the ridgeline to the northeast. It was at a distance of roughly 8 miles. It was steel, four-legged, with a glass cab. I had not seen it before. I had been looking at that ridgeline 4 times a day for 2 weeks. I photographed it, per the 8th variance. I did not range it. The next morning it was gone. The ridgeline was empty. I logged it as a horizon anomaly. I did not report it to the UHF, because the protocol said I did not have to. I was beginning to understand the protocol. The protocol existed to limit what I had to say out loud. The agency knew about the second tower. The agency had written the rule that meant I did not have to describe it. The kindness of the rule was that it spared me from naming the thing. That is the second stage. You begin to recognize the protocol as a translation device. You begin to suspect that the people who wrote it knew exactly what was happening and had decided that the cost of explanation was higher than the cost of containment. You begin to wonder which side of that calculation you are on. The first significant event happened on day 19. I was at the Osborne, doing a routine sweep, when I caught a column of smoke at azimuth 091, distance approximately 4 miles. Inside the parcel. Definitely inside. I could see the base, a dark patch of timber, what looked like a small clearing, and the column rising from the clearing center. I called it in on UHF. The woman acknowledged. She asked the standard questions. I answered. She said, "Stand by." 15 minutes later she came back on. She said, "Achoko, we need you to do a Category 3 observation. Are you familiar with the procedure?" I said I had read it. She said, "Read it again. Take your time. Then acknowledge." The Category 3 section of the orientation packet was 3 paragraphs long. I had read it twice during orientation and once more on day 4, and each time I had filed it away as something that would never apply to me. Most of the procedural sections in the packet had that quality. They described things you didn't expect to encounter, the way an airline safety card describes a water landing. A Category 3 observation was a smoke column inside the parcel that did not have an attributable source. The procedure was as follows. The operator was to leave the UHF channel open. The operator was to position themselves at the Osborne and continuously sight the base of the column. The operator was to verbally describe what they observed in real time, without interpretation, without inference, and without pause, until the column either dissipated or until the operator was instructed to stand down. The operator was not to look away from the column. The operator was not to use the spotting scope. The operator was to use only the Osborne, which has a fixed magnification and a graduated reticle. The instruction was clear that the verbal description was the entire purpose of the procedure. The agency did not want me to put out the fire. The agency did not want me to call dispatch. The agency wanted me to look at the column, and describe it, and not stop. I acknowledged. I went to the Osborne. I sighted the base. I keyed the UHF. I want to describe what I saw, because it is the part one have thought about every day since. The base of the column was in a small clearing, perhaps an acre, ringed by ponderosa. The clearing was not on any map I had been given. The smoke was rising from a single point near the clearing center. The point was not a fire. There were no flames. There was no glow. There was no charred ground. There was a hole. I described it that way. I said, the source appears to be a circular opening in the ground, approximately 2 meters in diameter, dark, with smoke rising vertically from it at a steady rate. There is no visible combustion. The surrounding vegetation is undisturbed. The woman did not respond. The protocol did not require her to. I kept describing. I described the smoke. It was gray, thin, rising in a column with very little drift despite the breeze I could see in the surrounding canopy. I described the clearing. The grass at the edge of the clearing was the same color as the grass elsewhere in the parcel, which was a pale gold appropriate to late spring. The grass within the clearing, near the opening, was darker. Not burned. Just darker. A green so deep it read almost black through the Osborne reticle. I described the air above the clearing. There was a heat shimmer, but it did not match the smoke. The shimmer was lateral, moving across the clearing horizontally, like the surface of a slow river seen from above. I had been speaking for perhaps 11 minutes when I saw the figure. It walked out of the trees on the east side of the clearing. It was a person. At that distance and through the Osborne I could not tell more than that. It walked across the clearing at a normal pace and stopped at the edge of the opening. It stood there. It looked down. I described it. The woman keyed in for the first time. She said, "Continue. Do not stop." I continued. I described the figure. I said it was wearing what appeared to be a uniform. Dark green or dark brown, hard to tell at 4 miles. Long sleeves. A cap. The figure was looking down into the opening and did not move. I described the figure for perhaps 2 minutes. Then I described the second figure. It came out of the trees on the west side of the clearing and walked the same path. It stopped at the edge of the opening. It stood next to the first figure. It looked down. The two figures did not interact. They did not speak, as far as I could tell at that distance. They did not turn toward one another. A third figure emerged. Then a fourth. I described each one. They came at intervals of perhaps 30 to 40 seconds, from different points along the tree line, walking the same kind of path, stopping at the same edge, looking down. By the time I had counted 14 figures, the clearing was crowded. The woman keyed in. She said, very quietly, "Achoko, how many?" I told her. She said, "Continue." The figures kept arriving. I want to be honest about what I felt. I was not afraid in the way you are afraid of an animal in the dark. I was afraid the way you are afraid when a number keeps going up and you do not know what it is counting. At 23 figures the smoke from the opening began to thin. At 29 figures it stopped entirely. The figures stood in a tight ring around the opening. They did not move. They were still looking down. I described all of this. Then, in perfect unison, the figures looked up. I did not see them turn their heads. I saw them looking down, and then I saw them looking up. There was no motion in between. It was as if the frame had skipped. They were looking at the tower. I am going to be precise about this, because it is the part one have to be precise about. The Osborne is fixed. The reticle is graduated. The figures were 4 miles away. I could not see their faces. I could not see their eyes. I could not, by any reasonable measure of human perception, have known they were looking at me. I knew they were looking at me. I said so. I said, on the UHF, they are looking at the tower. The woman said, "Step back from the Osborne." Do not look out the window. Sit down on the floor of the cab. Acknowledge. I acknowledged. I sat down on the floor. She said, "Stay there. I will tell you when to get up." I sat on the floor of the cab for what my watch later showed to be 1 hour and 17 minutes. I could hear the wind on the cab. I could hear the catwalk creaking the way it always creaked. I could not hear anything else. At the end of that time the woman keyed in and said, "Achoko, you can get up. The clearing is clear." I got up. I went to the Osborne. The clearing was empty. The opening was gone. The grass in the clearing was the pale gold of the rest of the parcel. I asked her, on the UHF, what they had been. She said, "I don't have the clearance to tell you and I wouldn't if I did." She said, "You did the procedure correctly. That's what matters. The procedure works." She paused. She said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you want to be relieved early?" I thought about it for a long time. I said no. She said, "Okay. We'll continue the rotation. There are 6 more weeks. If you change your mind, you tell me." I said I would. She said, "One more thing. The variants you don't have written down. If you ever see one of them at the base of the tower, looking up, that's the men in the green truck's job. You call me. You don't call me on UHF. You go to the desk drawer. There's an envelope at the back. You open it. You follow what it says." She signed off. I went to the desk drawer. There was an envelope at the back. It had not been there when I arrived. I had inventoried that drawer on day 1. I did not open it. The instruction had been to open it only if. I respected the if. I want to talk about the next 4 weeks, because the next 4 weeks are the part one cannot fully account for. The procedure held. I want to say that first. Whatever the agency was doing, whatever the parcel was, whatever the figures had been, the procedure I had been given continued to function. The road moved twice more. The weather diverged from the regional forecast in ways I logged faithfully. I observed 2 more horizon anomalies, once a watercourse that did not appear on any map, once a long, low building in a meadow where the topographic survey showed only meadow. I photographed neither one beyond a single frame each. I did not range them. I had 3 more nighttime auditory phenomena. The footsteps. The knocking. Once, on the UHF, which was supposed to be silent except for my conversations with the woman, I heard a man's voice say my name, 3 times, with a long pause between each. I did not respond. The protocol had told me what to do. The man in the green truck came twice more. He sat in the same place. He looked up. He left. I filed Form MSRS 4 each time. The woman acknowledged each time. She said, each time, he's allowed to look. The smoke columns did not return. There were no more Category 3 observations. I kept the private log. By the end of my rotation it had 37 entries. I want to describe the last week, because the last week is when the thing changed shape. On day 41, I woke at dawn and went out onto the catwalk. The tower was in fog. This was not unusual. The Achoko gets fog in the early morning, especially after cold nights. I drank coffee on the catwalk and watched the fog. The fog had a quality I had not seen before. It was not moving. The air was still, but fog usually has some internal motion, some drift, some thinning at the edges. This fog was uniform and stationary. It looked like a photograph of fog. I watched it for perhaps 20 minutes. In that 20 minutes, I did not hear a single bird. The Ochoko at dawn is a loud forest. There are jays and woodpeckers and nuthatches and the occasional owl finishing its night. I had heard them every dawn for 41 days. I went back into the cab. I checked the regional forecast on VHF. Clear, calm, 20% humidity. I checked the local thermometer. 48 degrees. I checked my watch. 0537. I went back to the catwalk. The fog was gone. There had been no wind. There had been no warming. The sun had not risen above the eastern ridge. The fog had simply ceased to be present, in the time it had taken me to walk into the cab and back out. I logged it. I did not report it. The protocol did not require me to. That afternoon, walking the perimeter of the concrete pad, I was authorized to walk the pad that was within the footprint. I saw a footprint in the dust at the base of the north ladder. It was a boot print. The tread pattern was a Vibram lug, common, the same as my own boots. The print was facing away from the ladder, as if someone had stepped down off the ladder and walked away. There was only one print. I walked the rest of the pad. There were no others. I had not descended the ladder that day. I had not descended it for 3 days. I went up to the cab. I keyed the UHF. I did not say what I had seen. I asked the woman a question instead. I said, the 9th variance. The one about seeing yourself. Has anyone ever had to use it? There was a long silence. She said, yes. I said, what happened? She said, they followed the procedure. They stayed in the cab. They waited for relief. The relief arrived. The relief said the coded phrase. They came down. I said, and. She said, and they finished out their rotation. They didn't take another contract. I said, the other one. The one they saw. What happened to it? She said, I don't know. We don't track those. The procedure doesn't require us to. I thought about that for a long time after she signed off. The procedure does not require us to. The agency had built a system that allowed the operators to continue functioning in the presence of phenomena the agency itself did not understand and did not need to. The procedure was not a tool of investigation. The procedure was a tool of containment. It contained the operator's response. It did not contain the phenomenon. The phenomenon was free to do whatever it did. The operator was contained. I want to be clear that I did not, after that, see myself at the base of the tower. I want to be clear that the envelope in the back of the drawer remained sealed, and that when I left the tower at the end of my rotation, I left the envelope where I had found it, because the orientation packet had told me to leave all materials in place for the next operator. The relief arrived on day 49. He was a man in his 60s, lean, weathered, with the effect of someone who had done this work for a long time. He climbed the ladder slowly. He stepped onto the catwalk. He looked at me. He said, I came up the long way. I acknowledged the phrase. We did the handoff. I walked him through the log, both the official log and, I admit this, the private one. I had decided to leave the private log behind. He read it without comment. When he finished, he closed it and said, good notes. I said, has it been like this for you, too? He said, It's been like this for everyone. I said, "Do you know what it is?" He looked at me for a long time. He had pale eyes, a kind I associate with people who have spent decades looking into distance. He said, "I know what the procedure is. That's what I know." He said, "If you want my advice, and you don't have to take it, you'll forget about the rest. You did the procedure. The procedure works. That's the whole job." I went down the ladder. I drove out the access road. The road came in from the southeast that day. The gates were where they were supposed to be. The drive out felt long. I want to end with two things, because they are the only things I have not been able to fit anywhere else. The first is that 2 weeks after I left the tower, I received a package at my home address in Boise. It contained a single sheet of paper, a check for the full balance of my contract, and a non-disclosure agreement I had already signed during orientation, sent back to me as a reminder. The sheet of paper was a printed form letter thanking me for my service and inviting me to apply for a Class 4 contract in the next fire season, at a different station. The letter listed 3 station options. 2 were in eastern Oregon. 1 was in northern Nevada. I have not yet decided whether to apply. The second is that on the morning I drove out of the tower, as I was passing through the inner gate, I saw a green pickup parked on the shoulder of the access road, perhaps 100 yards beyond the gate. The same truck. The same man. He was standing outside the truck this time. He was leaning against the driver's door. He was looking at me as I drove past. He raised his hand. Not a wave. An acknowledgement. I did not return it. The protocol, even though I was no longer technically on duty, said not to acknowledge. I drove past him. I watched him in the rearview mirror until the road bent and he disappeared from view. I did not see him again. I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear about that, because for the last several weeks, in the early mornings before the sun is up, I have been waking to the sound of footsteps on the deck outside my apartment. The deck is on the 2nd floor. It is not accessible from the ground without a ladder. I have not gone outside to check. I have not opened the curtain. I have followed the procedure I was given for that situation, even though I am no longer at the tower, even though no one has told me the procedure still applies. I have been thinking about whether to apply for the next contract. I think I will. The procedure works. That is the whole job.